Welcome in everyone tonight. In case you haven't been here before, my name is John Davis, JD. I'm the host of the For the Good of the Game podcast. We have two very special guests tonight, but I'd like to start off by saying thanks to Prep Spin Media, our producer William Warfield, the King of Stream, and Miggy Beef Jerky for their sponsorship of the show. Tonight, I'm going to give a little context going into this discussion as I introduce our two guests, and then we'll get right into it. Scott Laigo is the founder of Student Athlete Advocates out of the Pacific Northwest, specifically Seattle, Washington. He has over 25 years experience coaching at the high school and college levels. Student Athlete Advocates counsel on NCAA eligibility, recruiting, and the financial aid process. They work with school districts, individual schools, student athletes, and parents to help them navigate those processes. You can follow their work on Twitter and Instagram under SA Advocates, at SA Advocates, and on Facebook under their name Student Athlete Advocates. For more information or to contact them directly, I recommend you visit their website at saadvocates.org. And Coach Anthony Williams is the founder of Connected Athletics, a startup company focused on assisting student athletes with recruiting and transitions during their careers. Coach Williams is a former defensive coordinator, linebacker, and wide receivers coach at Yerba Buena High School from 86 to 90 and 94 to 97, as well as the wide receivers coach and linebackers coach at San Jose City College from 91 to 93. A three-sport athlete in high school and an all-district football player, Williams was a linebacker at San Jose City College, then moved on to play for the infamous coach Vic Rowan at San Francisco State University, graduating with a degree in industrial technology. He was an undrafted free agent who got an invite to the San Francisco 49ers camp as an inside linebacker, where he gained valuable experience despite not making the final roster. In fact, it was at the suggestion of legendary 49ers coach Bill Walsh that Anthony went into coach in both high school and college. In addition to Connected Athletics, Coach Williams is in his 12th year with Football University as the Director of Football Development, and he's also the Southwest Regional Director for Scouting for Exos Digital and Catapult Sports. So it is with great pride and excitement that I welcome Coach Anthony Williams and Coach Scott Laigo to the program. Guys, welcome.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John. Good to be here.
Well, gentlemen, I appreciate you guys taking the time out of your evening. I want to kind of set this up by giving each of you an opportunity to kind of talk about organizations, because I think it's important as we go through the progression of topics tonight that we're going to chat on to kind of people to kind of understand a little bit specifically about what you do. And there are many organizations out there that sell their recruiting services to students and parents, and you guys are a little bit different. So Scott, if you would start out talking about Student Athlete Advocates, kind of give our audience a taste for what you guys do.
Sure. Thanks for the invite also, Coach. Well, Student Athlete Advocates was started when I was the head football coach at Garfield High School in Seattle. I got the idea when I saw our school, which was primarily African-American and 20% white Asian, and now that to the gentrification of Amazon has actually flipped and become a very academic school. And I recognized that when I had a kid that was going to have the opportunity to go to Eastern Washington on what they then called the Prop 48, went in to see the counselors, good people, great people. That is not a shot on them, but started talking, lingo, NCAA eligibility center, all that kind of stuff, and they had no clue what I was talking about, sliding scale, any of that stuff. So it just became very apparent to me quickly of the issues, and especially with kids with marginalized, areas. Most people don't know this, but on average, it's about 464 to 1 is a counselor to student ratio in the country. In the state of California, it could be 1,000 to 1 at the big schools. So there's a chance and opportunity you probably won't even see your counselor while you're in high school. So I just trying to address this problem for full transparency. And, as you know, Coach, my stepson is the special teams coordinator at Penn State University. So I learn a lot from him and gain knowledge that way. So that's a lot of invaluable knowledge that I get, that, what's coming down the pipeline, some of the stuff that we'll probably even talk about tonight. So just recognizing the need, seeing the issues, and as we both know, all three of us, there's a lot of people making a lot of money off these kids. And so I'm on the opposite end, My wife probably would like me to have better rates and pay and not do so many pro bono things. But, my heart is where it's at, and I'm always going to be for the kids. It's not about, making the money. Though my wife would like me to be a little more capitalistic in my venture. So, but that's it.
Well, you bring up an important point as we transition and let Anthony talk about connected athletics a little bit. I want to just bring something out that you said, and it's not to bash anybody, but I had the same experience when I was helping coach in high school, both on Fort Knox at the DOD school, as well as my kids attending public school. We have many, many great teachers and counselors out there, but counselors in many schools are not trained or equipped to deal with advising students properly on the recruiting process. Doesn't mean they're bad people, just means they don't have the tools. So I want to you pointed that out, and it's not a bash on anybody, but I'm sure that motivates a lot of folks to get into it. Anthony, I give you the floor, sir, and talk about a little bit about your new company.
All right, thanks, John. Thanks for having me on. Connected Athletics is a new startup company that me and some friends started last year. We are all former student athletes, and we have noticed that there are many student athletes that struggle in their transition from high school to college, and then college to either a career in their major, or for the very 1% that go on and play in the NFL. And even those, once they get done with the NFL, transitioning back to the real world is tough for them. So we have developed a technology platform similar to LinkedIn and Instagram, where we are focused on helping student athletes understand that the things that make them a great student athlete will make them the next great, whatever they're going to be after their career, whether it's going to be a salesperson, marketing, going into the service, teacher, counselor, whatever. And so once we empower and develop and educate these student athletes on the things that make you a great athlete or will also make you great in your career, it's a matter of reprogramming their mind to take that same intensity, teamwork, those kind of other things that make them great into their next career. So that's what we're focused on now in our roadmap. But in the beginning, as a startup, we're strictly focused right now on helping that transition of student athletes from high school to college as they go through the recruiting process, and then also with the NCAA name, image, likeness, and how to understand and build a brand, where they can endorse products or use it to help get a nice job after they graduate.
Well, we'll get into a little bit of that too. I lost the picture on Scott. Scott, are you still there? Audio? Did we lose him, William?
Scott did drop out. Looks like his laptop or whatever he's on maybe died out on us.
Okay. I'm going to give him a second. He may jump on his phone. We'll continue for right now and see how it goes.
There he is.
He's back.
Sorry about that, guys.
So that's all right. Quite all right. So Anthony, when we talk about the process from high school to college, when you start, let's say for our audience, Anthony has a son, Aaron, who played at University of Texas and was drafted by the Buffalo Bills, played in the NFL. And so you've lived this both obviously as a coach and an athlete, but as a parent. And when you start talking about high school to college, what are the things you see bubbling up with athletes, especially for those whose parents were not involved in intercollegiate athletics? What do you see bubbling up as the key concerns most of the time for kids as they get ready to make that transition?
In talking with college coaches on a daily basis, I would say number one is their social media presence. Student athletes are making the mistake right now of merging their personal life with their student athlete life and trying to get recruited. And those two worlds should be held separate. To all student athletes and parents who are listening to this great podcast, the number one thing you can do to improve your recruiting is to have your son or daughter create a recruiting specific social media brand, either on Twitter or Instagram or whatever, but mainly on Twitter, because college coaches are not going to, if they don't see all the basic information in for example, your Twitter bio, that's going to help them evaluate you. Simple stuff. Name of your high school, what graduating class are you, your GPA, your position, some stats, what you're doing in your community, any football awards. If I can't see all of that to start the recruiting process, I'm not going to go to Google and search to find out, what's his GPA and what's her position. So that's the first thing I think that every student athlete can do to immediately enhance their recruiting presence in social media.
Scott, what do the day back in the day, and I mean, I'm 61 years old. I graduated from high school in '77, so we were just beyond wearing leather helmets and driving our dinosaurs to practice. So, it's the when you see kids coming out today, there's no longer, with all the digital stuff we have. It's not like having to reproduce DVDs or CDs and send them to coaches anymore. I still encourage kids, even today, to not send an email, but write a letter to a recruiting coordinator. I think it means more. I think it's more impactful, even though it's gone out of hell. But in terms of contacting coaches, making their presence known in additional social media, what do you usually counsel kids and parents on as they're prepping? And at what point in their high school career do you encourage them to get started?
Well, unfortunately, and I think we talked about it yesterday with our prep talk, but, we're looking at today, the COVID, the situation we're at now, it's just totally changed. With what I'm saying is, to answer your questions, you can technically get into the eligibility center as a sophomore, but as we both know, as all of us know, the recruiting world is getting younger and younger, and it's just earlier and earlier in the process. So I would say as early as you can, going back to what Coach Williams is saying, making sure you have a clean email, making sure your social media is right. Don't, you're going for a job. It's a $250,000 a year job, and you got to figure this out and make sure you're doing it right. And and if we're looking at today's world or with the COVID situation, it's called virtual recruiting. You see it on social media now for these coaches. I don't know if you guys saw, but Penn State is going to do a virtual combine. They're going to have their coaches do it. The high school coach is going to do the height, weight, everything like that. They're going to do. They've given them instruction. They've got a Twitter account. They're going to do it. So if Penn State's doing it, we all know who else is going to be doing it real soon. And one of them is probably where Coach is living in Austin. It's going to happen. Those guys, they're going to figure out how to get around the process. So making sure that you get this stuff done today is so important, and making sure you're in the digital world. And I would even say, like, what Coach Williams is saying, the COVID thing has really changed them. Okay, so some of the things that I now am advising kids is like, make sure you have a digital copy of your transcript. Make sure that you have a digital copy of your SAT, ACT score. You may not see your counselor. They're talking right now, maybe not even going back to school in the fall, at the actual school. So there's a lot of things you have to place in order for the coach to be able to recruit you, do it right. You're going to have to figure this piece out. And so it's totally different. So, like, again, going back to it, virtual recruiting and virtual combines now. We're in a different world, and so you got to adapt and change with it. But to fully answer your question, you've got to develop this pretty early now in your career. If you have a thought about going to high school, going off to college, start getting it done. Make sure your academics are straight. Make sure that you're getting your tapes right and huddle and all that good stuff. So,
can you talk a brief moment about the requirements from an academic standpoint in terms of credits across the board? I know that they may vary from state to state, but as far as NCAA requirements, just touch on that real quick, because that's a lot of parents really don't realize that.
Absolutely. So I use the mathematics 4x4. So every year you have 4 courses for 4 years equals the 16 core classes. Now, when I say core classes, this isn't like you have a special, courses that you have to take for the NCAA's approval. It's kind of the reverse. Your high school has to, send it to NCAA, core requirements, math, English, physical science, and some other courses that you can take, which every high school is a little bit different in what that course is called. So you have to know that. An important factor for the parents to know is that you can actually go into the NCAA high school portal, and you can get a full list of all the core classes that your high school has, so that when you sit down with the counselor, you can have a real full game plan. So again, like going back to what you were saying in the beginning, high school counselors' jobs, number one really job is to get kids through high school. A is maybe get them to college, and a student athlete if they don't understand it. So a lot of times, I'm sure Coach Williams feels this, and I'm sure you felt it sometimes. Parents say, "Oh, my kid's got a 3.8." Well, then all of a sudden I start pulling back that onion and taking away the PE courses and the auto classes and all that stuff, and that thing goes down to a 2.1, and we're holding on for dear life to get them, to 2.3, which then goes back to what you were saying. So you have to have a 2.3 GPA. That's the minimum. You have to have a 900. Then it would be a sliding scale: 900 on the SAT, 75 on the ACT, to be deemed an eligible, recruitable student athlete. And that goes for all sports. That's just not, football. It's women and men's, sports. So parents need to know those numbers and have that in their thing. And so make sure you know the core classes that your kids are taking. Make sure it's the core classes the NCAA has approved. And as you and I talked about on that podcast a couple months ago, Coach, I had a high school out of California when I was down there presenting, came up to me and said we had missed, we were a miss up the boat, and we didn't have 83 core classes that we had not administered to the NCAA for approval, and we almost cost the kid a scholarship. So it works both ways. I mean, you got to make sure that and it's not try to catch a moment to the counselor. It's just make sure you know what your school provides when it comes to the core classes.
Anthony, do you think?
John?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Oh no, I was going to add. You probably going to ask, but just want to add on to Scott. As a former athlete and a father of 4 Division I athletes, I would also recommend, on top of what Scott said, for all the parents and athletes listening right now, is what my wife, who's a 20-year educator right now. We, for all 4 of my kids, and I wasn't sure they were going to play D1, D2, or any sports, but we had an idea. I played football. My wife ran track in college. So we kind of had an idea that our kids are pretty good athletes. Freshman year, we scheduled a meeting with our counselor at each of the high schools, and we went in and we said, our son and daughter may have a chance to play collegiate sports at the next level. We want to meet with you every calendar year to make sure they're tracking on the core courses that Scott talked about. And oh, by the way, if you're not aware of it, here's the website link to the NCAA Eligibility Center. And look, let's work together to make sure that you don't drop the ball and my son doesn't drop the ball or my daughter doesn't drop the ball. So highly recommend, like Scott said, every parent who thinks their son has a chance to even play JUCO ball of any type, or a female playing ball, your favorite bookmark site should be the NCAA eligibilitycenter.org. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I would even
How important? No, go ahead, Scott.
I would even add on to that, Coach. This is kind of for the coaches that are on this thing too. This is what I advise all coaches, especially we know now that parents are kind of relying on this scholarship for their kids to go to college, is you have a conversation with your freshman class when they walk in the door. I did it at Garfield. I said, anybody who thinks, we all know inevitably you have a class meeting and say, how many of you guys want to play Division I football? And they all raise their hands, right? So, you got 30 potentials right in that room right now who think they're going to go to that next level. You have to have that conversation from day one. And it's more to protect you as the coach, that you have conversations, doing exactly what Coach Williams said. Make sure the parents know that go into the counselor's office and have that conversation. Be very clear. I don't know if my kid's going to make it. Could not, maybe, I'm not sure. But you have to have that conversation as a coach with these guys. In the state of California, what they're doing now is they're having an academic plan for the 4 years, and they have the parent, the kid, and the counselor sign it. So it's very clear that this was the plan. This is how we were going to do it. And then, year 3, you decided to go off and do your own geometry class. That's on you. We had a plan, and now we're in trouble because we have to meet these core requirements.
You touched on this a minute ago, Scott, when in talking about the virtual combine at Penn State. COVID has changed the world in many, many aspects, and we're going to get into a few of those here in a minute. But I wanted to kind of touch on something that we had all commented on, and I did a little research. It's interesting to see because I found 2 other, one video and one article that talked about it. We have seen a mass inflation in both offers from college coaches to athletes and in the number of quick commitments from athletes in response to some of those offers. Anthony, if you would address that a little bit in terms of within the playing field as we know it now, maybe a bad metaphor, given the fact that COVID has hit. What do you believe is kind of behind this, and how do you think it's going to affect the market, so to speak, in the long run?
Yeah, it's something you and I had talked about before, and I feel bad for the class of 20, for those kids that didn't finish their spring sports because of COVID. And obviously the class of 21, who literally did not get what we call in college recruiting that spring and summer evaluation. Because everything was shut down. There were no combines. There were no camps. You couldn't get on campus. There were no unofficials. There was no spring practice in football to come out and get a chance to see the university. So coaches are kind of flying blind a little bit with class of 21 because they haven't gone through that normal full evaluation of watching the kids junior year huddle video, bringing them on campus, having them to camp, looking at them at 7-on-7, reading some reports. So a lot of coaches are going, you know what? Hey, we're going to do some what we call nepotismal recruiting. Hey, if Alabama or Texas has offered that kid and we're in that same conference, we're going to offer them too. And so I think from a coach's standpoint, they are throwing out offers. I think there's 3x the number of offers this year than there was last year, just because coaches don't want to miss on a kid. And I think they're trying to find up through these virtual combines and camps that Scott just mentioned, trying to find any kind of new data, because all they've been doing in COVID-19, John, is watching huddle video. And that's important, but you have to understand that's just one part of the recruiting process, because there's a lot of 6 foot, 200-pound running backs across the country that could play from Oregon to Texas to Alabama to Clemson. How you figure out whether that kid is a fit for your team chemistry, going to be a fit on the university, that's when the recruiting really happens. Is this kid a fit? And so they're not getting that because that kid's not on campus. So they're trying to make up for it virtually. So as you and I talked about, my warning to student athletes and parents right now when kids get offers is understand what kind of offer that is. Is it a committable offer, or is it what most of the offers are is, hey, we're committing that we're going to recruit you. Now you need to go out and show us what you can do so we can turn that recruiting offer into a committable offer. But make sure you know what kind of offer you have. Make it clear with the head coach that if your son tried to commit right now, like, hey, Coach, Clemson is my dream school. You got this offer me. I want to commit right now. They might tell you, yeah, well, we're not at that point now. Let's dance before we get married, kind of a thing. And so they'll use words. So parents, just understand, and players, what kind of offer you're getting, and be clear about it as you leave that recruiting process.
I think that's an awesome point. And I don't, because there are so many intangibles that happen when, and there's two areas that jumped out at me when you were talking. And one of those is the fit for the program and the school. And I have always advised kids, don't ever pick a college just based on your sport. You really ought to pick the school from the perspective of, if I did nothing else but academics, would this be a great place for me to be? And then the sports tend to be gravy on the steak after that. And the other thing is the degree to which you see them move in space versus on film. Even if you've studied a lot of film on a particular kid, or a lot of film like most college coaches and recruiting coordinators have, there's still no substitute for seeing a kid live and seeing the fast twitch reaction and those kinds of things that they see when they're doing drills and 7-on-7 and that kind of stuff. Scott, do you think there's going to be a backlash with all of this, with the inflated offerings, and based on what Anthony just talked about with the type of offer? Do you think there's going to end up being, unfortunately for this class, a whole lot of disappointed kids that have to kind of backpedal and regroup?
Yeah, I think that's kind of become the new term in this year, that it's going to be the decommit year, and that they're going to have a lot of people shying away here at the last second and stuff like that. If you can officially get onto the campus, maybe in the fall, can you really see your D-line coach and see your DB coach really working, and maybe you're like, maybe this isn't really my fit, and then they're going to get up, or do they just jump into the portal? I mean, those are, I'm with Anthony 1,000% on this. I think that, and I mean, I do understand it, but I also think that sometimes we need to hit the brakes a little bit and say, take this slowly, figure this out, do the right thing, make sure it's what you fit for you. And like you guys said, I mean, if the sport leaves you, you leave the sport. You got to look around at that campus and say, can I be here for 4 years? And can I do this? Because this is where I really, really want to be. And I think that's an important thing to think about when you make this decision. And, as Coach Saban has said before, you don't want to make a 4-year decision. You want to make a 40-year decision. So, but I also think the most important thing, another insight that I can give you, just tell you, I heard it from a birdie, these kids, doing what we're doing right here, these Zooms, be attentive, be there, be present. I've heard some stories where guys are like looking up on their phones, not paying attention, not dressed right. They leave the room. I mean, you're getting a big time chance and opportunity to go to a major university. Make sure you're present. You're going to be there for the hour, half an hour Zoom call with your coach, with the head coach or whoever. And so some inside information, guys. This is just like, again, this is just a weird time that we're living in. Zoom's not really the way. We like to do it from home and eat the pie with mom and do all that good stuff like the old days. You're not going to do that anymore. This is just going to be the Zoom for a while, and you're going to have to figure it out and do the virtual apple pie through the Zoom call, I guess. So, so a little word to the wise for these student athletes. It's just a different, world we're living in. Hopefully for another 6 months, 8 months, where I'm hoping and praying and fingers crossed that we can get past all this stuff.
Well, and I think it's important because it translates over to what the coach is going to see when they meet the young man or woman in person. So many kids today. I joke and say we have a generation of kids out there that have the weakest eye muscles and the strongest thumb muscles in history. Because all their focus is on a 3x4 screen, and all they're doing is this all day long. So it's the kind of thing where when you get to meet in person, even if it is virtual, you're right on point. Like if you're in person, you want to shake the hand, give them a good firm handshake, look them in the eye, and be responsive and be in the moment. And just unfortunately, there's a whole lot of kids because of it's funny. When I was in the military, we had weapons of mass destruction, and nowadays they call this the weapon of mass distraction. And that's where everybody's attention is. So it's incumbent upon that young person or their parents, to bring that up. I want to kind of slide into something that is probably not fair to us to talk about in detail right now because they're so little known, but it's the NIL, or name, image, and likeness changes that are happening on the horizon right now for collegiate student athletes. And this has a multifaceted impact on collegiate athletics from a lot of standpoints. There's also, and I'm kicking myself for not writing it down because it just flew out of my head. There's also a gentleman that actually started a league, a professional college league that kids can sign up to play and make money. That they whether they go to college at the same time is immaterial. The idea is it's a college level pro league that potentially could eventually draw some kids away. The original or the initial projections are that it's going to appeal more to the game of basketball specifically because it's grounded in that, and to a lot of inner city kids who might not have opportunity because they come from under programs or disadvantaged areas. But name, image, likeness. Right now, California was the first one to pass it. Multiple states have followed suit. The NCAA first rejected it. Now they've recanted and said, okay, let's take a look at it. And they've actually put out policy. Anthony, I'm going to kind of throw this at you first. From the standpoint of what you guys are looking at from a transition standpoint, whether it be from high school to college athletics or from college to NFL or college to a career, what are you advising, or what are you guys looking at as a new company to advise students on with regard to branding and carrying that forward for their future?
It's a great question and great topic. I'm going to be, me, John, pretty well. I'm pretty controversial and out of the box thinking. Let's kind of go back. There are some student athletes where college is just not for them. I mean, let's be honest, whether you're from the inner city or the country or rural, suburban, whatever, some kids like, I barely got through high school. I just didn't like it. It wasn't me, but I'm a pretty good athlete, whether I play tennis or golf or football. So I think we need to kind of take a step back and kind of erase that image and profile of what a student athlete looks like. And for the ones that want to go to college and use their sport to get a better education and set themselves up for the next 40 years, as we always talk about, that's great. But let's be real that there are a lot of kids that go to Kentucky and are playing basketball. They're like, hey, I'm here for one semester, and then I'm going to go be playing for the Denver Nuggets next year, kind of thing. So we need to successfully enable both types of athletes in that case. Right now with the NCAA, everybody's focused on NIL right now, and everybody's like, oh my God, it's going to be out of control. And it's going to be about the Joneses, and you're going to have boosters, buying Scott's t-shirts to get them to come to Alabama. To me, let's push the brakes. Let's think out of the box, and let's think more positive and proactive. Obviously, everybody's not going to be a Tim Tebow, or here in Austin, a Vince Young or Colt McCoy. They're not going to sell tens of thousands of his jersey. But if a kid has some type of entrepreneurial spirit, or has a landscaping company or whatever, and he decides to make some pins promoting his service or whatever as he's playing football or volleyball, whatever, they should be able to be paid in their likeness. And so people are all focused on, well, yeah, we're just going to have some booster, throw $500,000 at this kid to get him to come there. I mean, yeah, that might still happen, but it's happening today. So let's that cross each other out. Let's teach these student athletes that if your sport, or when your sport comes to an end, start to have what my dad used to say in the Army. Now, John, you know me, I'm an Army brat. My dad, 32 years in the Army, he used to always tell me, have a plan B. If you blow out your knee tomorrow, what's going to be your backup plan? Because you're not staying at home. And so have a plan of either having a business or some type of service or something where if you have the knowledge and the talent and the drive to build a strong online presence that's building up the bigger brand, it's either can help you get a job down the road at a Google or an eBay or whatever field you're in, or feed your entrepreneurial spirit that, hey, I want to start my own graphic design business. I want to be the next company that develops video games. I don't know, but let's empower those kids to do both of those things. And that's kind of what we're working on, is having kids think outside the box. What do you love to do now? How can we build that into either a company or a service, and build that as you're going through college and getting smarter? And really, as we Scott, John, college is really more about you going through and experiencing life. Grades are part of it, but you're probably going to meet your wife in college. You're probably going to meet your business partners in college. And so we need to teach these kids how to network and use those kind of services to get ready, because their sport will come to an end. As we all know the numbers, only 1% of student athletes, specifically in football, are going to play that sport at the pro level.
Yeah, and I want to point out that, back that down a notch. It's funny how parents view failure, particularly those parents that are intoxicated into the. I think according to Evergreen Research, the last report I saw was the $17 billion competitive sports industry, which involves all the travel teams, all the tournaments, all the combines, and all that type stuff, AAU, all that. Parents get romanced into believing that their child is the next LeBron, the next whatever, fill in the blank. And the reality is, only 2% of high school athletes are what we call heavily recruited. And ordinarily, being in the 98th percentile in anything is a good thing. In this case, if you want to get a scholarship, it may not be. So I think, first of all, people need to have a little bit of realism in terms of how they view, and it's widely discussed, it's widely published, but you still find the parent that holds on to the belief, because they're living vicariously through their kid for whatever reason, that their kid is going to bloom. And I could spend a whole week of podcast talking about that. But Scott, when you get back to what Anthony was saying a minute ago about the involvement with the NIL stuff, do you think that it's necessarily is it necessarily something that kids need to be cognizant of when they're still in high school, or do you think it's better left for them to consider as it grows and develops once they get into college, for students that are juniors and seniors right now in high school?
Yeah, I think that I want to be positive in the vein that I think that hopefully this thing will, Coach Williams is saying, it's going to pump the brakes. We'll figure this out a little bit. I'm a little concerned that the opening of this gate is, unfortunately, there's people that are thinking that the companies or an example like Oregon with, Phil Knight and Nike, what can they do from a marketing standpoint? Now, you can't use the Nike thing. You can't use your, team's logo. You can't do those things. It has to be a third party. But does that just open the floodgate? And they're talking about maybe even kids at 8th grade getting agents. Now, that's really concerning to me. And more concerning is that this can handle this and figure this whole thing out. And what will the money be like? That's really a concern for me personally. But going back to what you're trying to say, and I think, I think what will happen is, I do think that the NCAA has done this, just thrown their hands up in the air and just said, let's just, okay, we'll let you guys have what you want and do it. I do think that it'll be boxed down a little bit more and it'll be figured out a little bit more. And, we both know, I mean, the left guard on the football team is not going to make what the quarterback makes. So it's, there's an equity issue with those things that are going to be kind of a question. But I think right now, it's, if you're a big time recruiter, if you're Zion Williamson, you're going to, that the conversation is going to be there. If you're just, like I said, the left guard on the football team, you're probably not going to have that conversation. You probably don't really need to worry about it. Just, want to be one of the big uglies and just go block for the running back. So to answer your question, I want to try to be the positive and say, I think right now, I think that everybody should just pump the brakes and see kind of how the model works. But unfortunately, I think it is going to be part of the game. I think that will be part of the recruitment. Once the data comes out, the analysis, will Nick Saban's Mercedes dealerships be a part of this? We can put you up on the billboard with the Mercedes car. Again, I don't know what that would looks like. I'm a little concerned by all this. And so to be frank and honest, my stepson is too. I mean, they're, how do we handle this? How are we going to do this? And so very interesting to see. It will be very interesting. And my only question is, who's regulating this? Is it going to be the NCAA, or is it going to be a third party that's going to regulate this? Is it going to be your in-house, AD who doesn't really know what's going on, really doesn't understand who's the connections with? So it'll be interesting. And to answer what Anthony's saying and what he's talking about, I mean, that's a bigger even question for me. And just to use it here in the state of Washington, marijuana is legal. Does the kid go out and condone and back up and get a T-shirt on his back and says it's okay? And again, I'm not trying to make this controversial. All I'm saying is, if he does that, does that become his brand into what Anthony's saying, the next level for you as you're walking out that door? Is that your brand, that you're with that, best way to explain it, weed house? I'm not, again, I'm just, it's an interesting question that these kids will have to think about. And, to answer, to look what Anthony does, which I think is awesome. I think it's one of the things I always tell kids. I said, Anthony said yesterday, you only get one chance at this recruiting thing. You only get one chance if you're going to go to college. So connect with people. Make your Rolodex right there. There are some big-time boosters that can help you out down the road who maybe know some things, and maybe you're going to get into finance, and you can help you down the road. Connect with them. But there is the reality of the real world in college athletics. That booster now is really enjoying that freshman phenom that just walked in the door, and you're the senior walking out the door. So having that connection, making that part of your lexicon of who you want to be in your brand, I think it's really, really important. I love what they're trying to do with Connect. That makes total sense.
Well,
Yeah,
John,
I want to go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to add to what Scott said. So it isn't like this is a new model. So let's remember that there are 8th grade gymnasts and golfers and other sports who turn pro at 12, and nobody says anything. So let's, and I'm not trying to be controversial, John, sorry, but let's not act like, oh my God, football is going to go crazy. We've got 12-year-olds being Olympic champions who are leaving home, going to live with somebody's ranch, do gymnastics for many years, and nobody says anything. Or I'm pulling my daughter out of school. She's going to live in Florida and train with Maria Navratilova for tennis, and nobody says anything. But the minute it's part of the big three, it's like the world's coming to an end. So let's calm a little bit, let this thing work out, and let's be another point that Scott made. We're not talking about endorsements. Nike can't come in and go, okay, we want Scott to come to Oregon, so let's throw him his own shoe deal. We're not talking about that. What I think we're more talking about is going back to you said, the 98%. If there is a left guard in Scott's example who's like, yeah, I'm not going to be Cedric Benson, or I'm not going to be Russell Wilson, but I would like to work for one of the top investment brokers in New York City, and I'm building my brand to do that. What's wrong with that? So let's get past he's going to be on Gatorade, he's going to be on a Kellogg's Frosted Flakes box, or all that kind of stuff. They're still going to be the 1 or 2%, the LeBrons, the Zions. But for the other ones who are like, I'm just trying to get an internship at this really cool social marketing company in Lubbock, Texas, let's allow them to do that. So to Scott's point, we need to have people involved who see it, the forest from the trees, and that everybody's not getting these huge $1 million orders and endorsements. We're looking at kids like, yeah, I want to use my likeness as a volleyball player to go work for Spalding because I really want to be in a job in the sports industry or whatever. So I just wanted to add those 2 points to what he said.
I think those
Excellent.
are super points. And there's to get at your the other end of what you're talking about. In those other Olympic sports, as they call them, what you find a lot of times is when kids turn 12 or they're in middle school and they become a phenom at some level in some sport, there's all of a sudden these quote handlers involved, and that's the part in the big three sports that bother me, is that there's going to be a lot of wolves in sheep's clothing grabbing parents by the earlobe saying, hey, I can get your kid so and so. And I think really and truly the goodness of this thing, looking at it from a positive standpoint, is you may be, let's say, I'm going to throw a name out, and I don't have any, even though he came, from here, Tim Couch. Okay, so you've got a guy that is a massively popular, very successful college quarterback. Game, for whatever reason, attitude, athletic ability, the system, he didn't, fit in the pros and have a career, as it were. Is there any reason he shouldn't have made money off his name and likeness while he was in school? Because that's the larger portion of collegiate athletes, not just the quarterbacks, not just the marquee star players. Anybody that has a little notoriety at a college level who either one doesn't have any intent to play pro ball or doesn't necessarily have the skills or athletic talent to be drafted, even though they're playing at a college, a major level, and they should be able to be compensated at some level. I want to make one other point that's interesting. I just finished reading a book called "The Future is Faster Than You Think," and they talk about it's talking about the evolution of where we are in terms of exponential growth because of technology. In 2017, or in 2010, about 1/4 of the world's population was connected to the internet. And now it's about half the world's population. Some people estimate the population to be about 7.6 billion. They're saying by 2025, for all intents and purposes, it will become a global net. In other words, everybody in the world will have access to the internet. There are so many incredible opportunities for young people, Anthony, as you described, who have interests in other areas to leverage the internet and have online companies and online connectivity and make money while they're playing collegiate athletics, that it would be a shame if they are not afforded that opportunity. And I think that's just going to continue every year that goes on to get bigger and better. So we can go back to any and all of these topics, and I'm willing to do that. But I want to get at something that's going on right now. I spent a very interesting last 2 days on some fairly long webinars with multiple different organizations talking about the social fabric and the developments that are going on, that were brought to a crescendo by George Floyd, even though he certainly was not the only person to have lost his life or her life in a tragic way at the hands of law enforcement officers. But there's a dynamic going on right now that a lot of people are scared to talk about. I absolutely applaud Manuel Acho, because he put out his second episode now called Difficult Conversations with a Black Man. And he's addressing the issues of racial inequality and injustice. And I think that this is something that it's going to have an impact in one way or another on recruiting. And I think part of the problem is, and I'll just be very frank, I think there are probably a lot of white coaches out there who are very uncomfortable and really don't know how to approach it. It's not, even though there's guys out there that are great coaches, there may be guys that are just uncomfortable and don't want to say something that's going to put a recruit on edge. So I'm interested in terms of, from both your standpoints, just your, personal, professional philosophies. What do you say to coaches? And I'm going to start with Anthony in this case, given the fact that, one, you've got the experience as a parent and a coach, as does Scott. But obviously you're living something that we can't, and that's that you're a Black man in America and you've grown up with this issue. How do you think this affects recruiters, and what do you say? What's the dialogue we need to have to make this easier in the face of this social adversity?
Wow. I mean, we could go on forever on this one. I'll try and be short, but what I would say is this: is that we are in unprecedented times, and when you and I talked about it, nothing against George Floyd, but I think that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, and I think now you have not just minorities or people of color seeing that footage and being like, "Oh my God, here we go again." I think you saw a lot of Caucasians in other races go, hey, this is wrong from a human being standpoint. And I think that's why we're seeing now going to the third week of protesting around the globe of other police departments and police brutality being an issue. As it pertains to football, I can tell you this. I'm going to throw my coach names out there. My high school coach, Dan Atencio, my junior college coach, Howard Gay, and my college coach, Vic Rowan, all tremendous men who helped me become the man that I am today through my sport of football. There are a lot of good coaches out there that truly care about all of their student athletes, and no matter what race, color, religion they are. But there is a small percentage, I won't say they're bad apples, but there's a percentage who have used their power as the head coach to say my way or the highway, or treat these kids and say to these kids anything they want to, whether it was blasphemous to their race, their culture, or their background, or their family. And so I think this is going to be a wake-up call for all coaches, most of them Caucasian, who are now going to have to watch what they say and how they treat their student athletes and make sure that they are understanding of their plight, and not just going by what their history was or how, it's just the good old boy system. And that's how we talk down here in Alabama. I think those days might be ending here pretty soon, as you're seeing the problems with the strength and conditioning coach at Clemson. You're seeing issues in Iowa right now with Kurt Prince and in Alabama. So I am hoping that this whole George Floyd unfortunate incident is going to cause all of us, John, to take a step back and have a wider perspective of the different religions, races of all student athletes, and treat them all fairly, and spend more time listening to their journey instead of going by what ideology we have of what a Muslim student athlete or a Black student athlete or a kid from the country or somebody else, what you think their journey has been. So that's kind of, I have a lot more to say, but I think I kind of would start there.
Scott, do you see? I have never lived in the Northwest. Been there multiple times. Every area of the country has its own challenges. I spent the portion of my middle school, late 60s to early 70s in Alabama. I saw, my mom and dad, believe it or not, actually bused me across town to a school that was about 50-50 integrated. And I thank them today now for doing that, because it taught me so many life experiences. How is it up regionally where you are in terms of, is it a big problem from what you've seen as a high school coach in the past? Is this something that we have to deal with, obviously on a national level, but on a regional basis, does it tend to be less of an issue in some places by your estimation?
No, it's just as much, being in an all, primarily African American school. Garfield was, we experienced it a lot. We experienced, the name calling, the whole 9 yards. We saw it, we felt it. It's happening here still today, where I live, right across literally the river on the other side. They had some guys who were, donning the Confederate flag and were, going to, protect their stores. And so it was sort of like the Cowboys and the Indian games and Indian days. And I was just like, this can't be happening in 2020 here. And to kind of go what Coach, Williams was saying, I think that this is another thing that I love about right here locally. And the coach, I'm going to give all the credit to Coach Peterson, but I think that's kind of what your question was. I think coaches like, I know Coach Franklin does a little bit of it, but Coach Peterson's program called Built for Life, I think was so valuable. And I know Coach Lake is going to continue it. And so you and I talked about it on our original podcast, where Coach Peterson, the presidential election, he had a, group of kids that were in his, came into the meeting room and were mad about the election, results. And so he said to all the kids in the room, he said, how many of you kids are registered to vote? And 3 kids raised their hands. And he just said, hey, meeting's over. If you're not going to be part of the process, then you're not going to be part of the answer. So I applaud Georgia Tech, what they're trying to do right now. They're trying to make November 3rd a day off from college athletics. so that every student athlete can go and vote and make sure that their national duty is being done. And so I think that the conversations that we're having about this, I think will definitely change. I think as, I'm not speaking for Coach Williams, but as an African-American parent, I mean, are you going to start asking those things and those questions? Is my kid going to be, protected, represented, right? Is he going to have these, are we going to talk about these issues? We're going to talk about race. I know Built, like I said, Built for Life has been a very valuable program here at the University of Washington, and they talk from finances to all the way to your brand, to your race relations, sexual, misconduct, everything. So it's all it's all out there for the kids. So I definitely think this conversation is going to be a lot of guys. And I think really the one last thing I would say about it, I think as a parent, I think the other thing you need to do when your evaluation is kind of the silence that you're seeing from some programs. And I think you have to make that part of your evaluation. Is that really part of who they are, their DNA? Are they really doing the right things? I mean, every coach in the country should be stepping out and saying something. And last point, and Coach Williams, I know can appreciate this, is, Tom Herman said it, a week ago so eloquently. On Saturday afternoon, we get primarily a team full of African American kids with primarily a stadium full of white people, and they're all cheering them and all that kind of stuff. But is that kid then the same kid that you cheered for? Is he going to be married? Is he going to be able to be in your board and your company? Those are questions that you need to think about. That's a two-way standard here. We're great to cheer them, but we're not so much to bring them into the company, to the family. So I think those conversations are going to have to become part of the lexicon of college recruiting for any sport and all sports. I don't think that any parent wants their kids going into a bad environment, no matter what the sport is.
I agree 100%. I think that I go back to a conversation I had with a very long tenured high school coach who has been massively successful in building his program, despite the fact that, he's been successful on the scoreboard as well, which is usually the case. But he has a massive following up in Pennsylvania. And, he talks about the fact that it's so fundamental is that coaching is about relationships. And those relationships fall back on communication. So he said, when I was a young coach, I had a kid miss a meeting or coming late to school. I would probably have reacted and said, we're going to run gassers or up downs or whatever. And he said, now I take a step back and I say, you know what? I get with the kid and I find out what's going on. Is everything okay at home? Because you don't know when a kid when was their last meal? Is one of their parents an alcoholic? Might they have spousal abuse going on at home? Do they, all these kind of things. And there are so many pressures on students today. And that was, I was blessed to sit through a webinar today talking about the mental health aspect of athletics and how coaches, and this conversation we're having now with regard to the whole social change and racial injustice that we're going through in this country is relevant to that piece because it affects student athletes as well as students, non-athletic students, or ones that may do other extracurriculars in different ways. And it adds stress to their life in addition to, oh, by the way, I've got to make good grades. I've got to be here on time. I've got to have this, all that kind of stuff. So I think it's a conversation. One, it's got to start with the adults. And I think that there are a lot of white people in the country who do not understand or fathom what white privilege is. I think they think it's some fancy term that somebody made up. They don't have a concept of the fact that there are just certain inherent things that you're not subject to if you look like me, and there are other things that you don't even think about when you're white that someone that looks like Anthony may be subject to. There was a young man recently that I heard speak, and I won't bring his name up, but we were having a conversation, young African American guy, and he said, here he knows my family well, and he said, here's the difference. He said, when your kids are on the highway and they happen to look in the rearview mirror and there's a cop, whether it's a local cop or a state trooper behind them, there's a level of nervousness, but it doesn't match the same, the same visceral feeling that I get as a black man when it pulls up behind me, because I've seen too many instances of where a small traffic violation turns into a death. and I don't think a lot of people process on that level. I just don't think that they fathom that degree of stress. So I think it's an important conversation, and I think that I am really trying to step out for me personally, not just this podcast, but also I'm getting involved in some local things here to begin generating those conversations with parents and coaches, because I think it's something that needs to start at the youth level, and coaches need to be comfortable in their own skin, regardless of what they look like and what their athletes look like. And if they can just understand that they're there to use the sport of football, in our case, to transform lives and to be their genuine, authentic self and love every kid for who they are as a person first, and then as an athlete, and then as a football player, that they'll go a lot further. So I definitely think that they're all conversations that need to continue to have. Have you guys both seen either of the episodes that Emmanuel Acho put out?
I'm not,
So
but I will.
Manny is a good friend of ours. He played with my son at Texas. Our families are very close. Manny also had some great news. He was just added to replace Jason Whitlock on Speak for Yourself on Fox. And so Manny and his sons and his brother Sam have always been two of the most upstanding young men I've ever met across football and just in life. So yeah, I did see his first episode. I haven't seen the second one yet, but he and I were texting. Did a great job. I'll finish with this, and just so because I have the platform, thanks to you and to Scott, as an African American male, what we are looking for, number one, is that we want white people like yourselves, and you are, John and Scott, as outraged when you see video of whether it's George Floyd or anybody else. As a black person, when I see a Caucasian shoot up a church and that guy get arrested in handcuffs and on the way to the police station can stop and get McDonald's and then get his due process his day in court, and then I see a black man get killed over potentially a $20 counterfeit bill, that is a problem. And that's all we're trying to get people to see. I think people are thinking there's a gray area. In this situation, it's I hate to say it, it's black or white. Either you see that this is completely wrong from a human and civil rights standpoint, or you don't. And if you don't, let's start having conversations. We're not trying to pull you over to think like us, and we're not trying to, John, you brought up it perfectly. We're not saying white privilege is a bad thing. It is what it is. It isn't just prejudice. It isn't just racism. It's systemic racism throughout many parts of our life, even in sports. And so I think now what you're seeing is that you're seeing a momentum of people like, you know what, I do see it, and it's got to change. And at the end of the day, until, I'll just keep it real with you, John, like I always do, until we have a lot of white people outraged to try and make change, it's just all smoke and noise right now. So that's really what a lot of these, the real protests, not the looting, not the rioting, but the real protesters are trying to assemble people of different colors, different backgrounds to say, this is wrong, whether it happens to George Floyd or Michael Ramos here in Austin or Tom Smith out in the Pacific Northwest. It's wrong. And we need to start making changes from a systemic level. So that's where I would say my opinion is right now.
Well, and I am anything but a political person. Part of that is the way I was raised, and part of it was 23 years in the Army. I had my own views, but I put a tweet out today with an article that Barack Obama wrote, and it talked about electing officials at the grassroots level and that's how you can change things. And that's I don't want to get into politics, and I don't want to take party sides, but it's a privilege and a right for every American citizen to be able to vote. And now more than ever, regardless of what you believe, you need to get off the couch and either mail in or get to your voting station if you can, and make sure you cast your vote. I told you guys the other day, I really think this decade is going to be the most pivotal on this issue in the history of the United States, more pivotal than the mid 60s during civil rights. I really believe that. I think that our generations, plural, have an opportunity to change the United States and the course of the world if we can get this right, at least step in that direction. Because I think since 1964 and 65, it's been one step forward, two steps back. I really do. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of people out there who look like me that don't believe that. They think we're really progressive. But as I heard a black coach say, football coach say the other day, look, he said, if you're a white black on your team, playing a mixed hip hop tape as they're coming out of the locker room when you're going on the field for practice is not the right answer. It doesn't solve your problem, you know. And
Yeah.
he said, you've got to get to know those kids on a gut level,
Yeah.
mentally, physically, morally. You've got to know them and be able to relate to them and be authentic. That's what they want to see, because a kid can smell a fake a mile away. You know, that's just the
Absolutely.
reality of it. And Scott, I wanted to ask one last thing. We talked a little bit at the outset about the fundamentals of recruiting and some of the things that you guys do in terms of counseling parents and all. How important, because there's I certainly don't know of a high school coach out there who has it written in his contract. It's my job to get my student athletes scholarships to go to college. And at the collegiate level, the same applies. It's more about winning games to keep your job than it is about getting anybody into the pros. Unless you're John Calipari, which he openly admits, he recruits to get guys into the NBA. But what do you recommend when you sit down, whether it's in a group setting, talking to a group from a school or an individual family? What do you recommend that parents do on a consistent basis, in addition to anything we've talked about tonight, to at least hedge their student athlete getting into college and hopefully competing for some type of scholarship?
Well, number one, start off with a good game plan. Know what you're, doing. What, like Anthony said, go in and set up an academic game plan. Know exactly what you're going to do in your next 4 years. How that's going to work. That's the most important thing. Your recruitment is your recruitment. I listened to a podcast today, or yesterday, said universal traits. If you're 4'1" and you want to play on the center of the basketball team for UCLA, probably chances aren't real great. So, do you fit the profile? What real level are you? If you're, we talk about it now in the NFL, how long their arms are for cornerback play. If you're, got short arms, you got short arms, but you have to make it up somewhere else. My point is, you have to have the physical attributes to be there, and then you got to kind of see where your level is, where you're at. We all want to strive for D1, but doesn't mean that you can't go to the league playing D2 or going to an FCS program. So, just sometimes the fit just fits for where you're going, right? Cooper Kupp is from Eastern Washington University, and he's playing in the NFL. So he did okay for himself. Okay, that's number one. Number two is, and number three is the social. I always say you have 3 resumes. You have your academics, you have your athletic resume, which is your huddle, and your third resume is your social media brand. Who are you? What are you putting out? When you hit that like share button, you're liking and sharing something. And the college coach can make an inference about you because of what you decided to like or and share. So I think those are things. But just having a good game plan, know exactly where you're at, and then just understanding where the chips will fall. I mean, we like I said, we'd all like to be the D1, blah blah blah. But if you got a full ride to Eastern Washington and you think you're going to wait out for the Washington State University offer, you're playing a game that you probably shouldn't play. They may come back at you at the last minute and say, hey, we'd like to bring you to Washington State. Eastern Washington gets it. They get it. You're going to go to a Pac-12 school. That makes sense for them. But if you're going to say, I'm going to wait, and then you go back to Eastern right at the last second, what does Eastern say? Hey, man, we're full. We want guys who want to be committed, want to be here. And so that's the thing. One last thing I wanted to say to Anthony personally, a little remiss, probably my lighting and stuff like that, but I'm actually Filipino-American. So, for us and my family, we've gone through a lot of the struggles that, a lot of people, to see a sign that says no Filipinos allowed, we understand the struggle and we have not gone through unfortunately, the situations that the African-American community is, but I'm with you, rowing with you. So we're in the brown-black group and we're going together, and this isn't a degrade coach, saying that I didn't want to be with my kinship white guy, John Davis. That's not the point. I just wanted to say, hey, and my family's, was our 100th celebration last year in the city of Seattle. My grandfather came here in 1919 on a boat. So we understand the immigration. We understand all these things. So, and I think that's why, I would know for a fact that I'm the only second Filipino coach in the city, because my aunt does a historical society. So she they interviewed me for that. Not that that meant anything, because the bottom line is you got to win and lose. So no matter who you're from, where you're from.
No, I appreciate you correcting me, and I apologize for that. I grew up in the Bay Area, was my home, and I have Philippine friends, I have Samoan friends and teammates, and I'm still called Mexican, Puerto Rican, white. I mean, my wedding, I had 20 groomsmen. It looked like United Nations, and I love that I was able to get and not just know them that we were on a team, like ate with their families and got to know them. John mentioned his background, growing up in a segregated environment. To me, the upraising I had as an Army brat and moving every 2 years into a different country, a different state, and then settling in the Bay Area and learning so much about different cultures from Vietnamese to Caucasian has helped me become the man I am, which is why I understand why we need to understand each other's story, because it isn't just black or white. The Philippines have their history, and the Vietnamese have their, and the Chinese. We've gotten away, and I hate to preach right now, John, but we've gotten away from the strength of our country, which was the melting pot that used our parents and our grandparents. Our strength as a country is the different strengths that we get from different cultures and races, and we've gotten away from that. And I agree, John. I think this decade we are the most divisive we have been, even before maybe even civil rights. And I think that the young people right now have the power to say, you know what, we're not going to make the same mistakes that this generation, Gen X or Gen Y or baby boomers made. We're going to make a change now. So I would empower and applaud all the young student athletes that are out there to use your voice and use your brand of whatever you play to affect change first in your community and then grow up from there. Don't try and change things in Minneapolis when you live in Austin, Texas. Start with Austin, Texas. Start in the Pacific Northwest. Start in Kentucky. And together we'll all grow and come together. But I appreciate Scott getting to know you and hearing your background. And John, you know how much respect I have for you. I'm always available and open to have these kind of conversations at any time. Because until you have difficult conversations, you're not going to have the change necessary to improve our lives and our grandchildren's life down the road.
I agree 100%. Anthony, for you personally, whatever you want to put out with regard to your own brand with the companies you're working with or with Connected Athletics, what's the best way for people to find you?
Our website is connectedathletics.org. We're on social media. We're on Twitter and Instagram. Parents and players, if you want to truly understand the process of transitioning successfully and all the things that it encompasses, reach out to us. We have a great team of a bunch of guys who have coached and played at many levels, and we want to empower our student athletes to take advantage of the transitional recruiting process, because as Scott mentioned earlier, and John, you and I talked about, you only get recruited once and there are no mulligans. So it's better to maximize it, be proactive, stay in front of it, and then continue to use that. And John, as I mentioned, as I finish here, we're not just one of the many other companies in the supply chain of high school recruiting where once you get the offer, we're like, okay, great. Good luck, John. We hope you do well at Clemson. We want to stay with you throughout college. And how do you build a network? And how do you find the right people and that kind of thing? And then, okay, now I got your degree. Now, how do you convert from being a student athlete to somebody who compete against somebody who didn't play a sport and they've already had 3 internships at Google, eBay, and Tesla? So we want to stay with you even after you get the offer, after you commit. And I think that's kind of our mission statement with Connected Athletics. So our website, connectedathletics.org, is a great place to start, or connect with me directly on social media.
Super. Scott, how about you?
Well, the same thing to both of you. I appreciate our conversation tonight, and talking about the recruiting process and talking about NLI and lastly, but the various issues that we're dealing with today. StudentAthleteAdvocates.org is our website. We are like Connected Athletes. We're on all the social media ways. You can also look on Facebook. Really, to be honest with you, it's what we provide mostly for all of our stuff is for parents to see when the next SAT, ACT test dates are. When you can apply for your FAFSA, how do you do these things? We put stories up. So it's not really about, getting you to this university. It's about the process and making sure that you understand it, making sure that, one thing Anthony and I and John all 3 of us know, the NCAA changes pretty regularly. So staying up with them every 5 minutes is a little tough, and so we want to try to provide that information, getting up as fast as we can. So contact us any which way, even through John or through Anthony. It doesn't matter. I support, Anthony, what he's doing, and I push many guys that I know their way because it's important. That's the biggest thing that, the connect and the things that we're talking about, being able to change your circumstance, is about those connections and that, building that brand and then being something after you graduate. Because we do all hang them up. One day, we do all hang them up. That's for sure.
That's right. That's right. I very famously, the local paper did an interview with my youngest son, who stopped playing college football at Edinburgh University after his junior year to pursue music. And the title of the article was "Trading Cleats for Beats." So, everybody's going to make that transition. I want to thank Coach Anthony Williams of Connected Athletics and Coach Scott Laigo of Student Athlete Advocates. I don't know, the reality is you could spend 5 hours talking about this process and get into excruciating detail. But the reality is I just wanted to bring some of the surface issues up, highlight you guys' programs, and make sure parents and athletes are aware out there that there are a lot of programs doing what you do, but there's a lot of programs that charge a heck of a lot of money and don't get you anywhere. Get with someone that is genuine, someone that knows what they're doing and can guide you through the process in the right way. So, gentlemen, thank you again for being here. I want to say thanks to the King of Stream, William Moorfield, and Minga Beef Jerky, and Prep Spin Media for hosting the show tonight. And to all of our listeners and or viewers out there, I want to remind you that if you're out there doing something for the game of football, make sure you're doing it for the good of the game. Take care and God bless.
Thank you.
Great show.